Okay, so we're going to start with just an overview of our phylogeny, and Kelly and I had the origin of humans, and while we're going about it, there's a video playing. It just shows like a graphic of the evolution of time. So starting out, we have the common ancestor, which diverged into the chimpanzees and the bonobos, and then you come down here to a synapomorphy of bipedalism that Colleen's going to talk about in a minute, and you have the Sahelanthropus cadensis, Aurantigenesis, and Ardipithecus, which lived from 7 to 4 million years ago.
Right. And after this, you have a synapomorphy of massive teeth, and this was with the Australopithecines, which diverged and lived about 4 to 2 million years ago. And then from this diverged the Homo habilis species and the Homo erectus species, and some synapomorphies for these were the development of a larger brain and the ability to make simple tools, which was new. Tanner's going to talk about that, how those two coincide. Homo habilis lived from 1 to 2 million years ago, and one of the sister taxa, Homo erectus, diverged from 2 million years ago and lived to 500,000 years ago. And the synapomorphies for the Homo erectus group were a larger brain, a smaller teeth like molars, and then longer legs and arched feet.
And then the Homo erectus came from that, and it lived 2 to 1/2 million years ago, and then it diverged into the Homo neanderthalensis. And a synapomorphy for this group is the increased brain size, the ability to create more sophisticated tools, and then the Homo heidelbergensis. We don't really know that much about it. We're not going to talk very much on it, but then the Homo sapiens came, which are us, and that happened about 200,000 years ago. And we had the larger brain, a smaller face, and the capacity for art, more symbolic thought, and a full-blown language.
Right on the back, we're going to talk about our traits. Okay, so the first trait that we're going to address is bipedalism. For those of you who don't know what bipedalism is, it's the development, it's formal locomotion on your 2 rear limbs of your feet. And why did we choose bipedalism as an important trait to demonstrate evolution from apes to humans? Specifically, I'm going to talk more about the foot. So the development of the foot are particularly distinct throughout this phylogeny because the foot is the only part of the skeleton that's constantly and directly in contact with the earth, so it's going to have the most intense natural selection process, and it's the most responsible for locomotion. And so it's going to have the most selective pressures to change the anatomy and functionality of the foot. And then the biggest forms of bipedalism are through comparative anatomy and fossil evidence. Both comparative anatomy and fossil evidence suggest that bipedalism happened rapidly at first, like you saw in our phylogeny. Bipedalism happened directly after the common ancestor. They found evidence of it, and then gradually throughout the rest of the phylogeny, the anatomy of the foot and the legs changed more. So the first kind of evidence I want to talk about is comparative anatomy. Because of this, we can see that there is a relatively constant progression of the foot from the earliest species, which they think is Aurantigenesis right here. And so here you have a human foot, and this is from the Pan species. Some different elements of the feet are large for a human foot, or actually I'll talk about this one first, are a small heel, ankle adapted for climbing, and a flexible midfoot, and then a grasping big toe. So the Homo habilis, which is right here, is argued to have the first example of full bipedalism, but that one's kind of still up for debate. And then studies have examined the development of an opposable hallux. So right here, this is an opposable hallux. It's a big toe like a thumb. It's abductable from the other lateral toes. And they've studied the anatomical progression of that trait into a big toe, like that is adducted with the other toes. So like in a human foot, this is the phalange that they were talking about. And this evolution occurred because apes went from being they were an arboreal species and they're climbing, and they had to have the opposable hallux for grasping branches and everything. But then they went to a more adducted toe because it was more for weight bearing. Because we are believed to this is all originating in Africa, and then when you go to more open grasslands and everything, transferring it to a more weight-bearing form of a foot for locomotion is important. And then, the first and oldest known hominin to show concrete evidence of bipedal evolution, or of bipedalism, is Ororhyntogenensis, like I said, which is from 6 million years ago. And then, fossil evidence. So these aren't all of the species, but I put a few key ones. This basically shows just how we became walking more upright. Like I said, the first fossil to suggest bipedalism was in Ororhyntogenensis. However, the greatest amount of evidence is from the species Australopithecus afarensis, which occurred approximately 4 to 2.8 million years ago. They showed examples of bipedalism through the structure of their hip, knees, and feet. Okay, so you're probably wondering why I chose this one. This is Ororhyntogenensis. The fossil evidence that this species showed bipedalism is that it has a longer femur bone, and the joint is more, it like shows more that they would be walking upright instead of like quadrupedalism. And then an example, I'm going to read from this because it's from one of our sources. So Australopithecus afarensis left behind a 27-meter long track. It's called the track of footprints, called the Lake Tole tracks in Tanzania, which was from 3.7 million years ago. And these feet prints showed that 3 Australopithecus afarensis walked through a muddy layer of volcanic ash, and the footprints were preserved when it hardened. And so when they were studying these, it showed that they walked with an upright posture, obviously 2 footprints, and then it showed that there was a strong heel strike and then a follow through on the ball of the foot, and then the hallux made the last contact before they pushed off. However, they did find that there was a slight gap in between the opposable hallux and the other lateral toes, so this shows that there was like a divergence, into like there was a smaller gap than it had been, but it was still slightly divergent, so it wasn't into a complete bipedal structure. And then hypotheses about the ecological drivers for bipedalism. Scientists, these are all like speculated, nothing is concrete, but they believe that it freed up the use of the arms to carry children and more like newer foraged goods. Regarding food sources, it allowed them to obtain previously inaccessible food sources. Walking upright allows humans to more easily regulate their body temperature. Like I said, apes are believed to originate in Africa, and so with the sun, walking on 2 feet, it's easier to regulate your body temperature. You're not so exposed to the sun. And then bipedalism is more efficient and less energy taxing than quadrupedalism. Obviously, it's easier to walk on 2 than on 4. If you don't believe me, try doing a bear crawl. And then next, we're going to talk about the evolution of teeth.
All right, it is important to have the dental evidence and the fossil record for teeth because the dental eruption ages are direct correlations for age at weaning, sexual maturity, brain mass, body mass, and mortality rate. So we have to know those things to be able to compare the ontogenetic differences for the different species as they evolve. And then the chimp's teeth, M1 and M2, which is molar 1 and molar 2, erupt around age 4, and in a Homo sapien, M1 and M2 erupt anywhere from 5 to 8 years of age. So that's just a difference between the dental development. And then in the Neanderthal, they had crown formations at age 6. They have crown formation completed 6 months before a Homo sapien does. And that's a direct correlation to the difference between the brain mass and the skull size. But Tanner's going to talk more about the differences in the brain size from Neanderthal to Homo sapien later. And then, as you see, the molars are way larger for the chimpanzee, Australopithecus, than they are for the Homo genus. And especially the canine is a lot larger here. And you can open your mouth and see that your canine now is not near as large as a chimpanzee's canine would be. And a hypothesis for why this happened is because they were producing more when they lived in Africa, and then there was overcrowding, so they had to shift from just Africa to up to Eurasia, and this caused a change in the diet. So the canines got smaller because they're the teeth used to bite and rip, So it's probably larger animals in Africa, smaller animals in Eurasia. So over time, the canine didn't have to be as large. And that's one I think. It could have been because of the muscles, but my article just talked about the diet changes. Now we're going to talk about the brain and skull.
Okay, so with the brain and skull, there's much information out there about the actual brain. So they use the skull, and then they use like sometimes skull fragments, and they'll like use computer to generate the rest of it, and they just estimate brain information from that. But moving towards the evolution of the skull and the implications it has on brain size and capacity, we must first acknowledge like the chimpanzees and the divergence of they're called troglodytes, the chimpanzees, and the Homo genus. So from birth to adulthood, the modern human brain expands by a factor of 3.3, while the chimpanzee brain expands by a factor of 2.5. So this is like multiplication. With such a vast gap between the growth rates, it's necessary to like look between the two taxa to study the evolution over the course of the Homo genus. Starting with the Homo erectus, some past studies suggest that the brain of the species resembled that of a chimpanzee's, more so than it did like a modern human brain of like the Homo sapiens like us. However, other studies refute this hypothesis, stating that many key ontogenetic traits or traits of development from the earlier stage of maturation were already present in the modern humans, or already present in the Homo erectus, such as enlarged brain size in the womb and increased growth rates. With probable hints at a clean divergence from the chimpanzee lineage, we can jump down to later species of Homo neanderthals. Characteristics of brain patterns vary greatly among Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Neanderthals had a much larger brain with a higher growth rate during early infancy, even though both species share similar brain size at infancy or at birth. However, even with a higher growth rate, the brains of the Neanderthals did not reach maturation until much later than the Homo sapiens did. With this said, large adult brains are usually associated with slow life histories, meaning that there is an extended amount of time between each maturation milestone. However, the pace of life history is not set by the duration of brain growth. Thus, brain growth does not directly correlate with the maturation of any other feature or function that they may have. With this in mind, Neanderthals attain larger adult brains via higher growth rates, so like how fast it grew, rather than via an extended growth period, so how long it took, indicating that higher growth rates do not imply faster completion. So even though the Neanderthals had a higher growth rate, their brains were so much larger than the Homo sapiens that it actually took longer, even though the Homo sapiens had a slower growth rate. Similarly, modern humans attain their large adult brains through higher growth rates, like I said. And then taking a step back to view the change, one can hypothesize that significantly smaller brain sizes seen in the Homo sapiens could be a drag owed to natural selection on the mother's part. Large brains growing at a high growth rate takes a lot of energy out of the mother who's producing them in the womb. So this alternatively reduced reproduction rates. Hence, natural selection favored growing a smaller but equally as efficient brain, which required much less energy from the mothers. This expansion of reproduction rates may have been a key component to the Great Migration into Eurasia, as Callie had mentioned earlier. In all, evolution currently in life is very mosaic-like, so all over the place and not very linear, as many of us believe when we see that picture of the chimps walking down into humans, So that's it.
And then we have this kind of fun facts, chimps versus humans, because we have so many similarities between humans and chimps, and we've diverged and had a common ancestor so long ago. So DNA between chimps and humans differs by just over 1%. And then they have reproduction similarities as well. So the gestation period for chimps is 8 months, just like it would be for a human. And they don't reach sexual maturity until age 8 to 10, which is later in life like a human. Like the cats say they're sexually mature at age 1. So we're more similar to chimpanzees in that way. And also, apes will only raise approximately 3 young to full maturity. Unlike, again, a cat would raise a whole bunch of young. So chimps and humans are very alike there because we don't raise a whole lot of young.
And then high intelligence level, the physical anatomy and the central nervous system of a chimpanzee are extremely similar to that of a human. They can perform functions of, earlier thought only unique to humans, such as the creation of tools. They are the only Not the only species. They are the species that creates the most tools, except for humans. And then their use of memory is extremely comparable to humans because, for example, what kind of fruit or what kind of food sources they look for based on what season it is, just how they correlate the two. It's very similar to how a human thought process works. And then they are capable of reasoned and abstract thought. There have been examples of chimps who have been able to learn American Sign Language, and they've also been able to group symbols based on the looks of them and what they mean. They've been taught those. And then chimps also have a concept of self, which is if they look in a mirror, they can identify that it's themselves, which is very unique to them and us humans. And they can also understand and demonstrate mental and physical pain like a human.
And then with communication abilities, it's very nonverbal. Things that kissing, tickling, patting on the back, shaking of the fist, and stuff like that. And with these, what's even crazier is that they're using the same context. And so just as we would use those actions, they use them with the same meaning behind that. And then also, they can learn American Sign Language, learning 300 or more signs in one go. And then they can be learning basic computer skills that really only humans really have.
So it's just a little bit of a fun fact to conclude our presentation.
And picture thanks to Colleen.
All right, well, thank you. Okay, do we have any questions?
Joe, found anything about skull growth dependent on the brain function?
Really, the only thing they're pretty sure of is the maternal, and so it took too much energy out of them. But with the capacity, it was pretty similar throughout. I mean, how we said chimpanzees, had so many similar characteristics as us. So those characteristics were pretty seamless throughout, but there wasn't too much information.
Yeah, I think you're asking if skull size is dependent on brain size. They were really only able to determine it the other way around. Just assume the functionality of the brain based on the size of the fragments of the fossils they found.
Because they were really guessing everything that they had about brain function was due to skull size. So it's kind of hard to reverse that.
Go ahead.
Did you find any stuff about why they wanted to become bipedal to begin with? What I heard you said to carry children was one thing.
Mm-hmm. In one of my articles, it didn't really go into it. It just talked about proposed hypotheses. Like I said, to carry children, to get new sources of food. It's less energy taxing. And then, like I said, how we moved from Africa to Eurasia, the movement of that to more open grasslands and everything. It's just easy. You don't need the grass, the opposable house that I talked about. You don't need that to be grabbing onto trees and traveling through trees. Instead, it's more weight bearing because you're just walking across that flat land.
So what did the teeth tell us about the age of weaning?
As I think if they the dental eruption rates are earlier, then they wean earlier. Is what I got from the article, and that's important just to know the development differences.
Okay, so they don't have any sense of which one of those, if there was a shift in earlier weaning or later weaning, based on.
I'm pretty sure the bigger teeth they weaned earlier,
Okay.
and then we wean later. Like have smaller teeth.
Okay. All right. Thank you.